It came on the 73rd day. Yuna saw it first, not with her eyes. The hollow had no shape, no body, no form that light could touch. She saw it in the data. Every sensor on her console began to shift at once, readings bending in ways that should not have been possible. The temperature in open space around Earth's outer perimeter dropped by fractions of a degree. Energy outputs from orbiting stations flickered. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just a whisper of wrongness that crawled across every instrument like a cold hand pressing against glass. She picked up her communicator. "General Tejo." "I see it," he said. He was already in the command center. He had been sleeping there for the last 2 weeks. "It is here early," Yuna said. "It followed the relay signals." Suho was right. It is attracted to energy. The shell of relay nodes they had spent weeks building. Over 4,000 individual units now, stretching out from Earth in every direction, was blinking steadily, each one alive and calling to the next. They were beacons. They were also bait. "Should we shut them down?" she asked. Tejo was quiet for a moment. "No, not yet. Get me Suho." Suho was in his workshop when the call came. He had not slept in 36 hours, and his hands were shaking from too much coffee and too little food. Around him, his team, human and alien alike, were assembling the last batch of relay nodes. They had become a strange family over the past weeks, people and beings who did not share a language or a biology or a history, bound together by solder and desperation. He answered Tejo's call. "It is here," Tejo said. Suho closed his eyes. 73 days. The hollow had moved faster than projected, drawn by the very technology they had built to save the galaxy. For a moment, he felt the full absurdity of it. Humanity's solution was also humanity's danger. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the prototype sitting on his workbench. The device he had been building in secret for the last 3 weeks. The one he had not told anyone about until it was ready, because he wasn't sure it would work, and he didn't want to give false hope. "General," he said, "I need you to give me control of the relay network." "Why?" "Because I have an idea, and if it works, it will save us. And if it does not work, it will not matter, because we will all be dead anyway." There was a pause. Then Tejo said, "You are not making me feel better, Suho." "I know. Can I have the network?" "Yes." Suho connected his device to the central control system. Around him, his team watched in silence. The Narration engineer, who had called his technology crude 2 months ago, stood behind him, forearms folded, eyes fixed on the screen. "What is the plan?" the alien asked. Suho took a breath. "The hollow eats connections. That is what it does. It follows energy pathways and consumes them. Our relay nodes are independent. They do not connect to each other directly. But right now, they are all broadcasting. They are all producing energy. To the hollow, they look like a feast." "So you shut them down?" "No. I make them sing." He activated the device. Across the solar system and beyond, every relay node in the network changed its behavior simultaneously. Instead of broadcasting continuously, each one began to pulse. A sharp burst of energy, followed by silence, then another burst. Each node pulsed at a slightly different interval than the ones near it, creating a rolling wave of signals that moved outward through space, like ripples on water. The effect was immediate. The hollow, which had been drifting toward Earth in a slow, inevitable advance, hesitated. Yuna watched her sensors in disbelief as the entity's movement pattern changed. Instead of pushing inward, it began to spread outward, chasing the pulse wave. Each time it reached one node, the signal had already moved to the next, and the next, and the next. The hollow was following a trail that had no end, a path that led everywhere and nowhere, because every node was independent, and there was nothing to consume. It was like watching a predator chase its own shadow. "It is working," Yuna said, her voice barely above a whisper. On the refugee ships, sensors showed the same thing. Alien crews, who had been bracing for the end, stared at their screens as the dark presence that had destroyed their civilizations stuttered, confused, spreading thinner and thinner as it chased signals it could never catch. Suho watched the data with burning eyes. His hands had stopped shaking. Around him, his team began to breathe again. "The Pulse Network is decentralized," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "There is no center to collapse, no web to eat. Every node is alone, and every node is enough." The hollow did not die. It did not disappear, but it scattered, spreading so thin across such vast distances that its presence became background noise, a faint chill in deep space that sensors could detect, but that no longer had the density to consume anything. Like a fire starved of fuel, it faded into something that existed but could no longer destroy. It took 3 days before anyone truly believed it was over. On the 4th day, the alien delegations formally requested a meeting with President Dowen. The meeting took place in the same chamber where the vote had been held 2 months earlier, but this time, the room was different. Alien delegates filled the seats alongside human council members. Russian diplomats sat next to Earth's engineers. Beings from species Una still could not name stood in the aisles, their translators humming softly. The senior Russian diplomat, the same one who had first arrived on Jisu's shuttle, stood and addressed the room. "Before the collapse," he said, "there was a Galactic Council. It governed trade, mediated disputes, and set the standards by which civilizations were judged. That council is gone. What remains is what was built in the last 73 days, by hands that we once dismissed." He turned to face Dowen directly. "On behalf of the 12 surviving delegations, we offer Earth the seat of the new Galactic Accord. Not because you are the strongest, not because you are the most advanced, but because when the universe went dark, you were the ones who turned the lights back on." The chamber was silent. Every eye turned to Dowen. He stood slowly. He looked around the room, at Hana, who had worked herself to exhaustion keeping Earth running, at Jisu, who had held 12 species together through sheer patience, at Suho, who had built the impossible out of spare parts and stubbornness, at Yuna, who had flown into the dark and come back with the knowledge that saved them all. "We accept," Dowen said, "on one condition." The diplomat tilted his head. "No species will ever be called primitive again. Not by us, not by anyone. Every civilization in this accord is equal, whether they build with light or with wire, whether they have sailed the stars for 1,000 years or 10. That is the foundation. If you cannot agree to that, then find another leader." The diplomat looked at Dowen for a long time. Then he bowed. "Agreed." The chamber erupted in sound. Applause, translated cheers, and noises Yuna did not have words for but understood perfectly. She stood at the back of the room, exhausted, bruised, running on nothing but willpower and bad coffee, and she felt something she had not felt in 73 days. Hope. Later that night, she stood on the observation deck one last time. The sky was full of ships now, not broken refugees, but the beginnings of a fleet. Relay nodes blinked steadily across the darkness, tiny points of light passing messages from one to the next, stitching the galaxy back together one whisper at a time. Earth had not conquered anything. It had not proven it was the strongest or the smartest or the most powerful. It had simply done what humanity had always done, since the very beginning, since the first fire in the first cave on the first cold night. It refused to let the dark win. Yuna watched the stars reconnect, one by one, and smiled. H1. Building from ashes. The work began the next morning, and it did not stop. Suho had not expected to become the most important person on the planet. He was an engineer. He liked quiet rooms, circuit boards, and problems that had clear solutions. But the problem in front of him now had no clear solution. So he did what he had always done. He started with what he knew, and built outward. The old galactic network had been a centralized system. Every signal, every data packet, every navigation command passed through a chain of massive relay stations that were all connected to each other in one enormous web. It was elegant. It was efficient. And it was exactly why the Hollow had been able to destroy it so easily. One entry point was all it needed. Once inside, it traveled along the connections like fire along a trail of oil, consuming everything it touched. Suho's idea was the opposite. He sat in a workshop on the 32nd floor of the Deep Systems building, surrounded by alien engineers who towered over him, and human technicians who looked almost as tired as he did. On the table between them was a prototype no bigger than a shoebox. "We do not connect anything to anything," he said, pointing at the device. "Every relay is independent. It receives a signal, stores it, and broadcasts it outward on a short-range pulse. The next relay picks it up, stores it, and does the same. There is no network, there is no web. There is just a chain of individual nodes passing messages along like people in a line, whispering to each other." One of the Russian engineers, a tall being with 4 arms and an expression that Suho had learned to read as skeptical, tilted his head. "A message that takes seconds on the old network would take hours on this system." "Yes," Suho said. "It would be slow. It would be clumsy. By your standards, it would be embarrassing. But the Hollow cannot eat it, because there is nothing to eat. Each node is a dead end. The entity feeds on connections. We give it none." The Reshan stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "It is crude," the alien said. "It is human," Suho replied. They built the first working relay in 9 days. By the end of the second week, they had 200 of them, assembled in factories across 3 continents, with parts supplied by both human and alien engineers. The alien technology was more advanced in raw capability, but it was all designed to interface with the old network. Suho's team had to strip it down, remove every component that relied on centralized connectivity, and rebuild it around Earth's simpler architecture. It was like taking apart a supercomputer and reassembling it as a telegraph machine. It worked. While Suho built, Jisoo organized. She had been appointed as the liaison between Earth's military and the alien fleets, and her days were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and logistical nightmares. 12 different species, each with different atmospheric needs, different food requirements, different communication methods, and different ideas about who should be in charge of what. Jisoo handled all of it, with the same steady calm she brought to everything. Though some nights she sat alone in her quarters and pressed her hands against her face, and breathed slowly until the weight on her chest eased. The hardest part was trust. The alien species did not fully trust each other, and they certainly did not fully trust humanity. 200 years of being told you are primitive does not disappear because the situation has changed. Jisoo felt it in every meeting. The careful politeness, the hesitation, the way some of the alien delegates looked at human technology with barely hidden discomfort, as if using it was an admission of failure. She did not push. She did not argue. She simply showed up every day, did her job, and let the results speak for themselves. Slowly, very slowly, the walls began to come down. Meanwhile, Yuna was doing the most dangerous job of all. Taeho had authorized a reconnaissance mission into dead space, the vast regions where the network had collapsed and the Hollow's presence was strongest. Yuna led a small fleet of 6 fast scout ships, crewed by volunteers who understood that they might not come back. The mission lasted 11 days. What they found was worse than the data had suggested. The dead zones were not empty. They were wrong. Space itself felt different there, heavier, as if something massive and invisible was pressing down on everything. Instruments gave readings that made no sense. Energy signatures appeared and vanished. Two of Yuna's ships reported system failures, not mechanical breakdowns, but something deeper, as if the ships themselves were being drained. On the 8th day they lost the first ship. It simply went dark. No distress signal. No explosion. One moment it was there, the next it was not. Yuna ordered the fleet to pull back. On the 9th day, they lost the second ship the same way. She brought the remaining 4 ships home with data that would prove critical. The hollow was not moving randomly. It followed energy. The stronger the energy source, the faster it moved toward it. Earth, with its active power grid and growing relay network, was drawing it, like a flame draws a moth. Yuna delivered her report to Taeho and Dawan in person. She did not mention the 2 ships she had lost. She did not need to. Everyone already knew. Then, he called Hana. The counselor arrived expecting another argument. Instead, Dawan handed her the report and asked for her help. "You were right about one thing," he said. "We cannot do this if Earth's industrial capacity is not fully mobilized. I need someone who knows how to get things moving fast and who is not afraid to make people uncomfortable. That is you." Hana read the report. She looked up at Dawan. Whatever she was feeling, she kept it behind her eyes. 90 days was the estimate, she said. "We have used 30 of them," Dawan replied. Hana set the report down. "I will need full authority over resource allocation. No committee approvals, no delays. Done. And I want it on record that I still think this is the most reckless thing any president has ever done." Noted. Hana left the room and went to work. Within 72 hours, Earth's production output doubled. Factories that had been running single shifts went to 3. Mining operations expanded. Supply lines were reorganized. Hana was not gentle about it. She pushed, demanded, and occasionally shouted. But things moved. Suho kept building. Jisoo kept organizing. Yuna kept watching the sky. And somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, the hollow kept coming. 60 days left. The relays were being launched into orbit now, one after another, spreading outward from Earth in an expanding shell. Each one was a tiny, independent voice in the void, calling out to the next, passing along the whisper of civilization, refusing to go silent. It was slow, it was crude, it was human, and for the first time since the collapse, the galaxy had a heartbeat again. The burden of the unbroken. The argument started before Jisoo's shuttle even landed. President Dawan had called an emergency session of the Global Council within an hour of receiving her report. By the time the Reshan diplomats set foot on Earth's surface for the first time, every council chamber on the planet was already burning with debate. Dawan stood at the center of the main hall in the capital. He was not a tall man, and he did not have the kind of face that people remembered easily. But when he spoke, people listened, because he never wasted words, and he never said anything he did not mean. He had read Jisoo's full report twice. He had looked at the numbers. He had watched the footage from inside the refugee ships. And he had already made up his mind. The problem was that not everyone agreed with him. Counselor Hana was on her feet before Dawan could finish his opening statement. She was younger than most of the council members, sharp-tongued and popular with the public, and she had built her career on the principle that Earth should look after its own before reaching into the stars. She had opposed every galactic outreach program for the last 8 years, and today she had more ammunition than ever. "Let me make sure I understand what is being proposed," she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the chamber. "The same civilizations that looked at us 200 years ago and said we were too primitive to join them, the same ones that denied us access to their technology, their trade routes, their medical advances. Those civilizations are now asking us to save them, and we are actually considering saying yes." The chamber went quiet. Hana looked around the room, making eye contact with as many members as she could. "I have sympathy for their situation," I do. But sympathy does not change the facts. We have 8 billion people of our own. Our resources are not unlimited. If we pour everything into a galactic rescue mission, what happens to Earth? What happens to our people when the food reserves run low and the factories are stretched thin? Do we tell our own citizens to go hungry so that the species who would not even share a communication frequency with us can eat? There were nods around the chamber. Hana was saying what a lot of people were thinking. Darwin waited until she was finished. Then he stood. Everything Counselor Hana has said is factually correct, he began. And Hana looked surprised for a moment. We were rejected. We were dismissed. We were told in very polite language that we were not good enough. I remember it. Every person on this planet over the age of 30 remembers it. It was humiliating. He paused and let the silence hang. But I did not become president to settle old grudges, and I do not believe that the people of Earth elected me to watch billions of lives disappear into the dark because our feelings were hurt 2 centuries ago. The chamber stirred. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward. If we turn them away, Darwin continued, we prove every negative thing they ever said about us. That we are selfish, that we are small-minded, that we only care about our own survival. But if we help them, not because they deserve it, not because they earned it, but because it is the right thing to do, then we prove something much more important. We prove that humanity is exactly what we have always believed ourselves to be. Better than what the universe expected. Hana stood again. Pretty words, President Darwin, but pretty words do not feed people. What is the actual plan? Before Darwin could answer, the chamber doors opened, and Engineer Suho walked in. He was not supposed to be in this meeting. He was not a politician or a diplomat. He was a 31-year-old engineer from the Deep Systems Research Division. And he had grease under his fingernails and dark circles under his eyes, and he was carrying a tablet that he held up like a weapon. I am sorry for the interruption, he said, not sounding sorry at all. But the council needs to see this before they make any decisions. Taiho, who was standing near the back of the chamber, nodded at the security team to let him through. Suho walked to the center display and connected his tablet. The screen filled with data, wave patterns, energy readings, a map of the galaxy with a dark stain spreading across it like ink dropped in water. This is the entity that destroyed the network, Suho said. The aliens call it the Hollow. I have been analyzing the signal data from the collapse for the last 48 hours. Here is what I found. He pointed to the spreading stain on the map. It is still moving. It did not stop when the network collapsed. It consumed the network, yes, but now it is moving through open space, following residual energy trails, and those trails lead in every direction. He zoomed the map in. The room watched as the dark stain crept slowly, steadily, toward one particular point. Earth. Based on current projections, Suho said, his voice tight, the entity will reach our solar system in approximately 90 days, maybe less. The chamber erupted. People were shouting, standing, talking over each other. Hana looked at the screen with wide eyes. Darwin stood perfectly still, his jaw set. So the question, Suho said, raising his voice above the noise, is not whether we help the galaxy. The question is whether we can build a defense fast enough to survive what is coming. And for that, we are going to need every engineer, every scientist, and every resource we can get, including theirs. Counselor, you asked about a plan. Here is the plan. We work together, or we die alone. Those are the only 2 options. The chamber fell silent. Hana stared at Suho for a long moment. Then, she sat down slowly, her expression unreadable. Darwin looked around the room. I am calling a vote. All in favor of initiating the Galactic Recovery and Defense Initiative, say so now. The vote was not unanimous. Hana abstained, but it passed with a clear majority. As the chamber emptied, Darwin found Suho near the exit. 90 days? Darwin said quietly. Maybe less, Suho repeated. Darwin put a hand on the younger man's shoulder. Then we had better not waste a single one. That night, Yuna stood on the observation deck of the command center and looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the familiar patterns of stars, something ancient and hungry was moving toward them. She could not see it. She could not hear it. But she could feel it, the way animals feel a storm before it arrives. She thought about the alien children she had seen in the footage from Jisu's shuttle. She thought about the billions of lives drifting in the dark. She thought about Earth, small and stubborn, and burning bright in a galaxy that had gone cold. 90 days. She finished her coffee and went back to work. The delegation arrives. The ships arrived on the 5th day. There were 47 of them. Some were massive, the size of small cities, covered in hull plating that had once been beautiful, but was now cracked and scorched. Others were barely holding together, leaking atmosphere from broken seals, their engines flickering like candles in the wind. They came in slow, limping formation, and they stopped just outside Earth's orbit, as if they were afraid to come any closer. Yuna watched them from the command center. She had not slept more than 4 hours in the last 3 days, and her eyes burned, but she could not look away. She had spent her entire career listening to alien signals from a distance. Now they were here, right on the doorstep, and they were not the powerful civilizations she had studied in briefings. They were refugees. General Tejo stood beside her, arms folded, watching the same screen. 47 ships, Yuna said. 12 different species identified so far. Some of them are ones we have records on, others we have never seen before. Weapons? Most of their weapon systems are offline. They do not have the power to run them even if they wanted to. Tejo nodded. Open a channel. Let them know we see them. The first voice that came through was shaky. It belonged to a diplomat from a species called the Reshan, tall beings with silver-gray skin, who had once been part of the Galactic Ruling Council. The diplomat identified himself and spoke in broken Earth Common, a language he had clearly learned in a hurry. We come without hostility, he said. We come because there is nowhere else to go. Tejo did not respond immediately. He looked at Yuna, then at the rest of the room. Then he keyed the microphone. You are cleared to hold position. We will send a team to meet you. Do not advance past the orbital marker. He turned to Yuna. She is leading the contact team. Jisu was 34 years old. She had sharp eyes, steady hands, and a reputation for staying calm in situations that made other people lose their nerve. She had led first contact training exercises dozens of times. She had never done the real thing. She took a shuttle with a crew of 8 and crossed the gap between Earth's defense line and the alien fleet. As they approached the lead ship, the scale of the damage became real. Up close, the vessels looked even worse. Hull breaches had been patched with whatever was available. Entire sections were dark, running on emergency power only. Through one of the damaged viewports, Jisu could see figures moving in dim lighting, wrapped in thermal blankets. She docked with the lead ship and stepped aboard. The inside smelled like burnt metal and something she could not identify, something organic and sour, like fear given a physical scent. The corridors were wide enough for beings much larger than humans, and the ceilings stretched high above her. Emergency lights painted everything in pale blue. The Reshan diplomat met her in what had once been a grand meeting hall. Now it was a shelter, filled with beings from multiple species sitting on the floor, huddled together, sharing rations that looked dangerously small. Children of species Jisu had never seen clung to their parents. Some of them stared at her, some of them looked away. The diplomat bowed. Thank you for coming, Captain. Tell me what happened, Jisu said. He told her. The collapse had started without warning. One moment the galactic network was functioning as it had for millennia. The next, it began to unravel. starting from the outer edges and racing inward like fire along a fuse. Every system connected to the network went down in sequence. Navigation, communication, energy distribution, planetary defense, all of it. Species that had built their entire civilizations around the network found themselves suddenly blind, deaf, and powerless. But that was not the worst part. Something came through the network before it collapsed, the diplomat said. His voice dropped, and Jisoo saw genuine terror in his expression, something she had not expected from a being who stood 2 meters tall, and came from a species known for their composure. It moved through the relays like a living thing. It consumed the energy. It fed on the connections. And when there was nothing left to consume, the network died. What was it? Jisoo asked. We do not know. Our oldest records call it the Hollow. It is mentioned only in fragments, warnings left by civilizations that existed before ours. They said it sleeps in the deep spaces between galaxies, and it wakes when the network grows too large, too loud. We thought it was a myth. It was not a myth. No. She looked around the room at the hundreds of displaced beings. Then she looked back at the diplomat. What do you want from us? She asked. She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it. The diplomat straightened. Earth is the only civilization with its infrastructure intact. You are the only ones with working communication, working ships, working supply chains. The surviving fleets have gathered what they could, but without coordination they will starve, or fight each other, or drift until their power runs out. He paused. We are asking Earth to lead the recovery, to bring what remains of the galaxy together. Jisoo stared at him. For 200 years, humanity had been told it was not ready, not advanced enough, not mature enough. They had been kept outside the galactic community like children not yet old enough to sit at the table. And now the table was broken, and the adults were asking the children to fix it. She activated her communication link back to Earth. General Taeho, she said. Go ahead, Captain, Taeho replied. The situation is worse than we thought. The collapse was not an accident. Something caused it. Something that may still be active. The alien delegations are requesting that Earth take leadership of the recovery effort. They are asking us to unify the survivors. Silence. Long silence. How many survivors are we talking about? Taeho asked. Jisoo looked at the diplomat, who answered. Across the known galaxy, we estimate between 8 and 12 billion beings are still alive on ships or stations with remaining power. On isolated colony worlds, perhaps 50 billion more, but they are cut off and we cannot reach them. Jisoo relayed the numbers. She heard Taeho exhale slowly. Come home, Captain. Bring the diplomat with you. The President needs to hear this. Jisoo ended the call and turned to the Russian diplomat. Come with me, she said. We have a lot to talk about. As her shuttle pulled away from the alien fleet and headed back toward Earth, Jisoo looked out the viewport at the cluster of broken ships hanging in the darkness. For the first time in her career, the enormity of what was happening hit her fully. The galaxy had not just been damaged, it had been gutted. Everything those species had built over thousands of years was gone, and they were floating in the wreckage, looking at the one small blue planet that still had its lights on. She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. We are not ready for this, she whispered. But nobody ever was. That had never stopped humanity before. The alarms started at 3:47 in the morning. Yuna was halfway through her coffee when every screen in the monitoring room turned red at the same time. She set her cup down slowly and stared at the wall of data pouring across her display. Distress signals. Not one or two, but hundreds, then thousands. They came from every direction, from every corner of the sky, stacking on top of each other so fast that the system could not even sort them properly. She had been a lieutenant in Earth's Deep Signal Corps for 6 years. She had trained for solar flares, asteroid warnings, and rogue satellite collisions. She had never trained for this. Nobody had. Get General Taeho on the line, she said quietly. The room around her was frozen. Every operator sat still, eyes wide, watching their screens fill with noise. One of the younger analysts, a boy barely out of training, looked at her with his mouth open. She gave him a sharp look, and he turned back to his console. There was no time for panic. Tejo answered within 90 seconds. His voice was calm, the way it always was, like a man who had already expected the worst, and simply wanted to know the details. "How many signals?" he asked. "Over 12,000 and climbing," Yuna replied. "They are coming from known alien territories. Galactic sectors 9 through 42 are lit up. Every one of them is broadcasting emergency codes." There was silence on the other end. Then Tejo spoke again. "Lock it down. Full planetary watch. I want every satellite pointed outward, and every defense grid online, in 30 minutes. Yuna gave the orders. Around her, the room came back to life. People started moving, talking, typing. The frozen moment shattered, and was replaced by the organized chaos of people doing their jobs, because the alternative was too frightening to consider. Within the hour, the picture became clearer, and it was worse than anyone imagined. The Galactic Communication Network, the massive web of energy relays that connected every advanced civilization in the known universe, had collapsed. It did not slow down, it did not degrade, it simply stopped existing, as if someone had reached into the sky and pulled the plug on a machine that had been running for 10,000 years. Every species that depended on that network, which was nearly all of them, lost everything in a single moment. Navigation systems failed, trade routes vanished, fleets lost contact with their homeworlds, entire planets went dark. And Earth sat in the middle of it all, completely untouched. Yuna understood why almost immediately, and the irony made her chest tight. Earth had never been connected to the network. The galactic community had evaluated humanity 2 centuries ago and decided they were too primitive, too violent, too young. They gave Earth a polite refusal and moved on. Humanity had spent the last 200 years building its own systems, its own ships, its own way of reaching the stars, all of it running on technology that the rest of the galaxy considered laughably old-fashioned. Now that old-fashioned technology was the only thing still working. Tejo arrived at the command center before dawn. He was a tall man with gray at his temples, and the kind of face that never showed surprise. He stood behind Yuna's station and watched the data scroll past. The distress signals had stopped growing in number. Not because the crisis was over, but because there was no one left to send them. "What hit them?" he asked. Yuna pulled up the analysis her team had been running. "We do not know yet." The collapse started at the outer edge of the network, and moved inward at faster than light speed. It reached the core systems in under 6 hours. Whatever did this, it traveled through the network itself, like a virus moving through blood. Natural event? No, sir. The pattern is too clean, too deliberate. Something triggered this. Tejo nodded slowly. He crossed his arms and looked at the main screen, where a map of the galaxy showed thousands of red dots where green ones used to be. "How many civilizations are we talking about?" he asked. Based on known galactic records, at least 340 species were connected to the network. All of them are affected. Some of them had backup systems. Most did not. The weight of that number settled over the room like dust. 340 species, billions upon billions of lives thrown into darkness in a single night. Every eye looked back at him. "Listen to me," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled every corner. "What happened out there is beyond anything we have dealt with before. But we are still standing. Our systems are intact. Our people are safe. Right now, that makes us the most stable civilization in this galaxy. And that means the next few days are going to change everything." He looked at Yuna. "Start cataloging the distress signals. I want to know who is asking for help, where they are, and what condition they are in. Priority goes to anyone close enough to reach us. Yes, sir. And Yuna. He paused. Get some more coffee. It is going to be a long week. She almost smiled. Almost. Over the next 48 hours, Yuna and her team worked without rest. The signals told a terrible story. Entire fleets drifting without navigation. Space stations losing life support. Colony worlds cut off from food shipments that would never arrive. The galaxy had built itself on a single system. And when that system died, everything connected to it died too. Earth had been mocked for its independence, for its stubbornness, for refusing to abandon its own crude methods and accept galactic integration. Every ambassador who had visited Earth in the last 2 centuries had said the same thing, with polite smiles and barely hidden condescension. You will come around eventually. Everyone does. But Earth had not come around. Earth had kept its own power grids, its own communication lines, its own food production, its own everything. Not out of wisdom, Yuna thought, out of spite, mostly. Humanity had been told it was not good enough, and it had responded the way it always did. Fine. We will do it ourselves. And now the galaxy was burning, and the only light still on was Earth's. On the 3rd morning, Yuna detected something new. A cluster of ships, moving slowly, heading directly toward Earth's solar system. Their energy signatures were weak and unstable, like wounded animals dragging themselves toward the nearest shelter. She reported it to Tejo. He stared at the screen for a long time. They are coming to us, he said. Yes, sir. Then we had better be ready.